welcome back, everyone. We are joined by Colin again for another rousing episode of SCROTUS.
Same as it ever was.
This time, we're going to be talking about immigration. I know a lot of people out there just kind of shudder at the word immigration. So get ready. You'll probably get pissed off in the long run. It's a pretty it's a involved case, and I'm not going to get too deep into it. Just like previous episodes, I've said the same thing. I'll give you the highlights, but it's a pretty straightforward case in as much as it's probably going to be an easy decision for the court, but it will lead to a larger conversation that might get Colin or me, excuse me, or anyone listening to this fired up.
It's the object form, not the subject form. Thank you for correcting that,
I
Mitch. Please
know, I know,
continue.
I know. I have to because I get angry when people do it. So, I have to call myself on it when I do
Goodness gracious. Okay, continue.
it. All right. So our case is called Wilkinson versus Garland. And yes, that is Merrick Garland, as in the Attorney General of the United States. He is the one being sued, basically, on behalf of this immigrant. So in 2003, Mr. C2 Wilkinson entered the U.S. on a travel visa from Trinidad and Tobago. He was fleeing his country due to, quote, a violent encounter with police. I promise I did some digging. I tried to figure out what this violent encounter was. I could only find the basic, very, very basic phrase, violent encounter with police, on almost everything that I found. So we'll leave it at that.
I will
Speculation, what it
say
is.
I'm not an expert in this at all, but I do know that the crime situation in Trinidad and Tobago is notable, and
Right, I would assume
the
so, yeah.
police versus gang situation there is sort of live, hot, something like that.
Fair enough. So
My
whatever
take on it is
happens,
my take on it is neither of those sides are very nice people. So
right, right, right.
just that's yeah, like when you said Trinidad and Tobago, I'm like, oh, that thing. Yeah.
So whatever happened, he was fleeing from
Yeah.
something, and
Yep.
the United States government said, obviously gave him some type of refuge in the guise of a travel visa.
Okay. How long
Uh,
was the travel visa, do you know?
so this is the problem, and we'll get into that. So this was back in 2003 when he came over with the travel visa. Since 2003, he started to, build a life. He got married. He married an American citizen. They had a child together. This child apparently has severe physical problems, illnesses, severe asthma that has hospitalized him many times, and he's only 6 years old. So uh, a child with some level of physical disability. Fast forward to 2019, Mr. Wilkinson, excuse me, was arrested while doing a repair job. So apparently he was working for, I think, as I understood it, a friend of his doing house repairs in his friend's home, and the friend was not there. And police showed up to the home, found drugs in the house where he was working, and they arrested Wilkinson. At the time, Wilkinson contested that the drugs were not his and that he was, quote, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Eventually, the charges were later dismissed because there was no proof that the drugs actually belonged to him, and it was true that he did not own the house and he was not living there. He just happened to be working there for the time being. But before the charges were withdrawn, Wilkinson was summoned to court to contest the charges. And when he showed up to court that day, he was arrested by immigration officers due to an expired visa and was brought up for deportation. So that's some shady BS right there. He showed up to contest drug charges and was then arrested because in being arrested the first time, possibly unlawfully or unwarranted, they through the system found out, oh, he's not supposed to be here. He's under a expired travel visa. So kind of shitty luck for him.
Well, yeah, we'll see. Keep going.
Ian.
I have
So
opinions already, but yeah.
he applied for a cancellation of the deportation. So there is a certain statute that says uh, someone who is up for removal, they don't even call it deportation, it's called cancellation of removal. Yeah, of removal. You can contest it, and you have to meet four check boxes basically. So the attorney general can cancel a removal if you meet these four check boxes. So number one, the person has been in the US for a continuous 10 years. He checks that box. Number two, the person has been of good moral character during that period. For all intents and purposes, he checks that box. The person has no convictions. He checks that box now that they've withdrawn the drug charges. And number four, here's the sticking point. Removal of the individual would lead to, quote, exceptional and extremely unusual hardship for the person's spouse and or child who is an American citizen. So this is where we have a dispute, right? So
Yeah.
does he check that fourth box, having both a spouse and a child who are American citizens? Would his deportation cause them some quote exceptional and extremely unusual hardship? So Mr. Wilkinson had many people testify on his behalf that, in fact, his 6-year-old son would undergo some exceptional hardship, primarily because Wilkinson was the primary caretaker of the son, financially, emotionally, physically. He literally did everything for the son because his wife suffered from or suffers from severe depression, anxiety, and does not work because of it, and sometimes even sends their son to her mother for days at a time because she just can't handle, quote, being a parent. So the father is really the only person that little boy has. So he argued all of this in court. The immigration judge, however, ruled against him. And it seems the immigration judge ruled against him mainly because there are certain precedents and benchmarks that you have to hit in order to, quote, be exceptional and extremely unusual hardship. And this immigration judge felt he did not hit those benchmarks. He didn't actually qualify for that stipulation. So Wilkinson appealed that decision to the Board of Immigration Appeals. They also sided against him. He then further appealed it to the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. And this is interesting. This is kind of where it gets into the real question. The Third Circuit Court of Appeals said, hold on, this case is not in our jurisdiction. It's not reviewable to us because it's on immigration law and we don't handle that, right? You can't appeal that decision to us. We have no jurisdiction. And so they just kind of washed their hands of it and said, we want nothing to do with this. And so now Mr. Wilkinson has brought it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court agreed to hear it. So to the arguments in this case, Wilkinson argues that the 4 checkbox statute that I mentioned before is a problem of what they are calling mixing law and fact. So they're claiming that the determination of hardship should not be relegated to strict legal standards where you're meeting certain benchmarks, but rather should be a case-by-case basis, right? It should be on the facts of a case-by-case basis, right? So instead of having these benchmarks things that you have to meet, it should be a sliding scale is basically what they're saying. So therefore, an immigration judge who rules against someone, that person should then have the ability to appeal it to a circuit court to get an opinion of a panel of judges, because every circuit court of appeals has at least 3 judges on a panel hearing each case. So you have multiple opinions. The Attorney General's office, on the other hand, so the U.S. government, is arguing that Wilkinson is describing the hardship standard incorrectly. So he's actually miscategorizing what this hardship standard is doing. They're saying, wait. This is not some kind of mechanical thing where we say, oh, you didn't check that box, you didn't check that box, so thus you don't cover, you don't qualify as hardship. It's not mechanical. It actually does include some kind of fact finding um, and weighing of the facts on a case by case basis. So the immigration judge and the Board of Appeals, they're simply using their long history and experience in judging similar immigration cases, and they made their own discretionary decision against Mr. Wilkinson. So he has no business bringing it to a federal court of appeals. And further, since it is immigration and you're not a US citizen, then no, a federal court of appeals should not be able to hear such a case, if that makes sense. That's
Kind of,
the
as much as
that's
it can.
exactly that's the US's stance. Now here's where it kind of gets tied up in a bow. It seems like this will be a pretty easily decided case. In 2020, the Supreme Court heard a case called Guerrero Lasprilla versus Barr. That was Bill Barr at the time, Attorney General under Trump. So in this particular case, the Supreme Court decided that in cases where this law versus fact is in dispute, with this mixed thing, federal courts do actually have jurisdiction to review an immigration court's decision. So Supreme Court already said in 2020, well, no, in cases like this, especially when we are talking about standards of hardship, a federal court can hear such a case. It shouldn't just be immigration courts. So it basically is seeming that the Supreme Court took this case that we're talking about now because they expected the Attorney General's office to actually give them a different argument in this case, because it is a different case. It has different facts. But no, the Attorney General's office came with the same tired argument that apparently the administration before them used, and the Supreme Court's like, what? Why are you giving me the same tired shit over and over again? So it looks like they're gonna rule with Mr. Wilkinson. But you said you had feelings about it, so let me hear those feelings, and I'll give you sort of my feelings.
Well, I guess as always, my feelings are sort of, that's a great case, Mitch. Now, let me tell you what I think about this broader political, philosophical thing. I guess the feelings in the case are, wow, that sucks for him, I guess. No, truly, like, I feel bad. To me, it highlights, and this is not anything groundbreaking. To me, it's not an insight, it's just a comment. The incredibly, regardless of your stance on immigration, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's really broken in this country. The immigration system is completely, utterly broken. It's non-existent. We don't really even have a border at this point. Obviously, I care mostly about, in the case of being an American, I prioritize this country. I care a lot about this country. I also have family, close family, who live in another country. So this is divided loyalties? No, but I think obviously the border situation, like the land border situation with Mexico, is getting really bad right now. I don't want to overly date this episode too much, but there's the whole Eagle Pass thing happening in Texas and stuff like that. States are having to take over what the federal government should be doing. Things like that, like actually having a border, enforcing a border. And that is, I think primarily from my perspective, because America needs to have a border. But also, like, two things can be true, right? Well, I care probably the most about that. I also think it's shitty that we have a system that lets people in because it entices people to come to this country in ways that get them killed. They drown in Rio Grande River. They get trafficked in by human traffickers. All sorts of nasty shit goes on. There's all sorts of these really horrific, basically modern slavery situations. And I know that that's not this individual's experience, but I'm saying that the overall border disintegration, it's really bad for our country. My stance, my opinion. But it's also really bad for the people trying to get into our country, because I can't fault them for that, right? Like, if your life is crap and you want a better life, of course you go where it's better. And if this country called the United States is theoretically just letting people in right? I guess, well, maybe we'll try it. And then you get people who are brutal enough and nasty enough to be like, hey, I'm going to take advantage of the situation. And I'm just going to take advantage of the desperation, right? And I know it won't solve everything. There is no solving all world's problems, but this, even like the fact that this individual's been here for a while, but it was on a travel visa, but it was never really properly adjudicated what that travel visa was, how long. It's all up in the air. There's no clear rules for anything. It's really bad for our country, but it's also bad for individuals who maybe would, in a slightly more structured system, have actually wanted to come and actually do things, and actually integrate into society. But instead, they're forced into this complete gray zone because it's difficult to say what is actually the rule, right? Like, and I'm not a legal scholar, but when I look at the immigration situation, like what are the laws of America regarding this? I can't figure it out, and I'm from here. I'm a citizen. And so it's this
Right.
weird thing where this guy I feel for is getting kind of potentially his ass handed to him, and people just walk across the border. And then you get somebody who's actually, it's like, this is such a backwards way as it should be. Like, it's completely bananas that you can
And
just go
you're
and walk across, yet it's just a child could be without his caretaker, who's an American, the child who is an American citizen could be without a caretaker. It's insane.
So you made some really great points, and you're right. You anticipated something that I was going to say as part of this longer conversation of why is the Attorney General's office spending so much effort going after someone who I understand rule of law. And this is where I'm conflicted, and I'll get to that second part of my
You know,
brain in a second.
I
But
will say I'm conflicted too, right? Because there's clearly somebody didn't pay attention to their visa rules, right? And I care about that a lot too.
right,
So yeah, I'm not going all bleeding heart here, but I'm just saying that the system, the lack of clarity in the system allows for all manner of chaos, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
right. And so we get to the point of yes, under the law and under the rule of the law, I understand why the Attorney General's office would push the issue because this man is not supposed to be here. He is technically breaking our laws, right?
Yeah.
By overextending his visa or by being on here on an expired visa. So yes, I understand going after to deport him. It looks like they will eventually lose in this case because this guy should have his actual case heard by an appeals court to see, okay, does his child actually need him, etc. So that's a different thing. But the fact that it's being fought by our government, I understand that's what the law says, but the law also says that people, as you suggested, should not be pouring over our southern border,
Yeah.
by the hundreds of thousands a week or whatever the
It's
number
been
is
I mean since the illustrious chief has taken office, it's been like in the millions.
per week.
Not per week, but overall.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm under the impression that I read one figure that it was like sometimes like 100,000 a week, like which is ridiculous.
Yeah.
But the point being, those people are getting all kinds of grace.
And they're not just coming in, they're getting paid meals, paid flights, paid phones, paid everything.
Right. Whereas this man who has actually contributed to our society in some regard, right? I'm fairly certain was, a taxpayer because he was working here and has a son and wife who are American citizens. We are prioritizing his ejection uh, over these people who are bringing in drugs that are we know are killing people. Like
Yeah.
this is what should anger people.
Yeah.
That we have a system that will use taxpayer money to target people who really are not doing much harm and turning a blind eye to the people who are doing a lot of harm.
Oh yeah. No, I mean I know he just dropped out and it was no he was gonna drop out. But I'm a Vivek fan and his whole, you know, smoke drug lords at the border. I kind of get it. Like, I'm like, yeah, because it's not that people. It's not again. It's like there's the people who are caught in the middle, right? Who are just like, well, there's the people who are caught in the middle, and then there's all the horrific people taking advantage of them. And it's just this is what happens when you don't have clearly defined borders, and then you actively incentivize people to come in illegally.
Right.
Um, so if I may share, I will anonymize this and be as non-specific as necessary. But if I may share a family anecdote about this, so um, not about this, but about something similar related to visas. So some of my family members are dual citizens, and some of them are not, which is just what it is. And so a non-citizen wanted to travel with two of the dual citizens to visit, just to visit,
Right.
like with clear, not and like with no intention. I can vouch, no intention of overstaying a visitor visa.
Well, and
Just like
probably had a return date in
a return date would
plan.
have been booked. It was just a 30-day trip. It was just a vacation. We were just trying to have a family reunion. Is all we
Right.
were trying to do. We had return date. I mean, it was like I know these people. They wanted to. This individual wanted to just visit and then return. It's all that we were. But because the family is so international, we were like, well, we got to get a travel visa. And without going into too much detail, because it's YouTube, we'll just say that this family member unfortunately got caught in the gears of the very broken U.S. System and was denied a travel visa for no reason that any of us could really figure out why, because it was literally a travel visa with return dates booked, and it's like, but we couldn't do anything. Those of us who are here in the United States, it's like we can vouch. We will put them back. We will see them on the plane. Like all this stuff. It doesn't matter. Revoked. So the trip completely fell through, which was very frustrating because it's like we just want to see people, and we're not like. And it's one of these hilarious things where because I'm an American, for example, I can go visit anytime I want, but not everyone there can go visit here. And fine, I understand. Like, but again, I do want to have a strong border. But when somebody has family members, and two of the family members who had been traveling with that person are dual citizens, and we're all one family, it's like this is just for a trip. We're just trying to. We're not. But it was denied. So again, an anecdote, a personal anecdote. What is that worth? Well, it maybe underscores your point of they didn't allow us to do that, which we were trying to go by the books, follow all of the laws, follow all of the rules, do everything we had to do, pay for the thing. Meanwhile, you can just walk across the border. I mean, that makes me livid
Yep.
because people who actually try to do shit appropriately can I swear on the show?
We have before.
Are absolutely fucked, and everyone else just gets in free. It drives me crazy. It
Yeah.
just drives me nuts.
And that's exactly as I was reading the facts of this case, I was thinking that in the back of my head, like I understand that this man has violated a law and probably, should whether he meets that threshold of the hardship or not, with that withstanding, he should be brought up at least in court. And he's not disputing that, right? He's saying, yes, I understand, but I do meet these requirements of letting me stay here. And that's all he wanted to argue. But they're not even letting him argue that. And so them coming down on him, not even letting him argue his case, and then letting, other people come in willy-nilly, killing American citizens, like
Yeah.
it's baffling to me.
Yeah. My, my,
Again,
my
why
family
this is
member who
not
wanted to
talked
come,
about.
my family member who wanted to come have a family reunion was not trying to kill American citizens. I know this person intimately.
Right.
I promise you. The
But
last thing they would want to do would be to injure anybody.
for immigration being such a hot button issue as it is, and as it should be, why
Yeah,
is this case not being talked about at least a little bit?
I don't know. I think probably because you ready to wrap your heads in tinfoil, Alex Jones style, put 2 or 3 layers on. I think it's probably because it would point out the incongruity in the Biden administration's stance on the border, which appears to be something like no stance whatsoever, except when we want it to be.
which is why I think more Republican politicians probably should be in the know of these cases and be like, hey, this administration is talking out of both sides of their mouth. Here's example A, B, C, all
Yep.
the way through Z.
Yep. Say what
But
you want about Trump. He had a pretty clear, he had at least, now whether he would have been able to, I mean, he was, I know, he didn't fulfill it, but whoever's fault that really was, it's a combination probably, but he actually had a stance on the border. He had an actual stance.
which theoretically people say is what won him the election.
Yeah. Any stance, so even if you disagree with him, that was a stance. I don't know what this administration's stance is. It appears to really just be like whatever we want it to be right now. Shut up, pleb. Go back to the mines.
I can't use the words that I would like to describe what is going on in this country because we might get flagged. But
Well, let's not get flagged.
um, I've said it on Twitter. So if anyone out there is following my personal Twitter, you can go back and see the two words that I'm referring to, and they are not a theory. Yes,
Yeah,
the yes. I won't even say the words. I was going to say one of them, but I won't say it. It is not a theory. This is happening.
yeah, yeah. There's a
But
there's. Can I say there's a policy of no policy?
yes, that is quite
There's
accurate.
a intentional policy of no policy, which whenever that happens, whenever a government does that, that is a real like. If there is no policy and then there is no policy is actually being enforced, that's a policy. That's intentional.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
yep. People get caught in the crossfires. It's bad for everyone. It really is. But it's mostly bad for the country that is, in this case, America. Like it does not help us. It helps nobody, but it really doesn't help us. So
Right.
it's just insane. Yeah.
As I said though, this case seems to be it's going to have a pretty wrapped up outcome. We kind of know what's going to happen. We will revisit it when we do actually have an opinion, because I'm sure there will be something in the opinion that'll talk about some of this stuff that we've
Oh,
brought up. But
and Mitch, I will have an opinion about that opinion, guaranteed.
I'm sure. But I'm hoping for Mr. Wilkinson's case, you know, he could actually have his day in court where he can have a panel of judges listen to his pleas of, please let me stay for my son's sake. But I think that's what's going to happen. So, yay for him, bully for him. But as for now, we'll return to this when we have a decision. But case dismissed.